Argument forms and fallacies. What are they and how can they be useful? And what is there to avoid? Let's get into that. Keep watching. The philosopher by the name of Aristotle was a pupil of Plato, who is a pupil of Socrates, the father of Western philosophy as we know him. Aristotle discovered that there was a way to analyze arguments for their form rather than what their content was. What does that mean? It means that no matter what you're talking about in the argument, there is a structure that, if followed, the argument will be valid. Now, when I say valid, as I've explained in another video, validity does not equal truth necessarily. It simply means that the premises guarantee the conclusion. So in this case, with arguments that have the form Aristotle spoke of, whether they talk about trees, leaves, dogs, whatever, as long as the form is a specific way, the argument will be valid. Let's continue. It's the Modus Ponens argument. This is very basic, and if you know this form, it doesn't matter what the content of your argument is, so long as it follows this form, you will be speaking a valid argument. It's very easy to stray from a Modus Ponens argument to the fallacy, which I'm going to explain further, which is called denying the antecedent. The Modus Ponens argument form goes like this. Premise 1. If A, then B. Premise 2. A is true. Conclusion. Thus, B is true. Notice how, in order for the conclusion to be true, the premises have to be true for this to be valid. And so we're assuming that A causes B to be true. This means that if A is true, then B has to be true. Therefore, in a situation where B is not true, that means that A is not true. This is because there is no situation logically, according to the premise that if A then B, in which B can be not true and A can still be true, because it tells us here, if A is true, B will always be true. Let's go into an example. If A is that Susie is swimming and B is that Susie is wet, then the form of the argument will go this way. Premise 1. If Susie swims, then Susie will be wet. Premise 2. Susie swam. Conclusion. Thus, Susie is wet. Notice how, in the event that Susie swims, Susie will always be wet from it. Therefore, premise 2 saying that she is swimming guarantees the conclusion that Susie is wet. But what if she wasn't wet? What could we do about the argument form then? Well, we say that if Susie swims, Susie is wet. But Susie is not wet, therefore Susie did not swim. There is a danger here. You can analyze that incorrectly if you switch around the trues and the not trues in this form. Because whereas we switched around by saying B is not true, therefore A is not true, there is the fallacy known as denying the antecedent, which is when we switch those around, and instead of saying that the second is that Susie is not wet, which is B, is not true, we accidentally say A is not true, therefore the conclusion B is not true. That's a fallacy. The reason this is a fallacy is because there are a multitude of ways Susie could be wet without swimming, but there is no way in which Susie can swim without being wet, according to these premises. So the fallacy comes when, in the Modus Ponens argument, you accidentally write it this way. Premise 1, if A, then B. Premise 2, not A. Premise 3, or conclusion, therefore not B. That is fallacious because when we flip it around like that, what happens is we accidentally set up an argument where we're saying that one thing causes the other to not be so, when in reality there are many other ways for the other to be so. I'll give you another example. Premise 1. If Fido is a dog, then Fido is a mammal. Premise 2. Fido is a dog. Conclusion, thus Fido is a mammal. A logical way to twist it around would be this. Repeat. Premise 1, if Fido is a dog, Fido is a mammal. Premise 2, Fido is not a mammal. And conclusion, thus Fido is not a dog. The reason this is logical is there's no logical scenario in which Fido can be not a mammal but still be a dog, because all dogs are mammals. But the fallacious way of addressing this argument, the denying of the antecedent, would look like this. Premise 1, if Fido is a dog, Fido is a mammal. Premise 2, Fido is not a dog. Conclusion, thus Fido is not a mammal. The reason this is fallacious, again, is, as I said, this acts as though one thing being not true guarantees that the other is not true, when in reality, it is possible to not be a dog, but to still be a mammal. Reason why is because there's obviously several mammals that are not dogs. And so it would be fallacious to say that if Fido isn't a dog, he's not a mammal, right? But it is logical to say that if he is not a mammal, he is not a dog. Which is why it's very tricky, very easy to analyze this argument incorrectly and to stray into fallacious territory. And so that's why I'm giving you the form, the proper form, both if A is true and if B is false. Those are the two times where it is the logical analysis of the argument. Once you are saying that A is not true, therefore B is not true, that's when it's false. Because A can be false while B is still true, but not the other way around. If this makes sense and you're still interested and you're still here, there are other videos and other playlists for you to check out to feed that brain of yours. And as always, subscribe to never miss out. You're watching Freedom Thinks with Timothy Rogers. See you in the next video.